As Shakespeare said, to stand
or not to stand?
That is the question. You might assume that because I stand in my YouTube videos, this is what I consider to be the best option. Yet if you look at some of my YouTube videos, you'll see that I'm actually sitting. When I run an online webinar or workshop, again, I usually sit. It's not that one is automatically better. It's about choosing the right one for the right context. Today, I'm going to cover the 3 factors that you want to think about when it comes to deciding whether the context is better for standing or better for sitting.
When I entered my first Toastmasters contest after the pandemic, it was an entirely virtual contest. All the speeches were done through Zoom. And at this time, what I noticed from a lot of my competitors was that they were sitting down to do their speeches. Bearing in mind, the contest is based on really important parameters of speaking. How you use your voice, your gestures, your body language, the energy that you have, the engagement with the audience. Not all of that obviously translates online. But there's a tendency that when you sit down, it lowers your energy. You become less expressive through your voice and your gestures. And you can see what's happening at the moment, that I'm slumping in my body language. A lot of my gestures are starting to get lost at the bottom of the screen. And my voice has settled into more of a level conversational tone rather than having all those fluctuations that you want when you're speaking. When I stood up to present my contest speech, I automatically looked better. If you had pressed the mute button on all of our speeches and gone through and said, who is the best speaker? I would have stood out. Literally not because of the content, not because of what I was saying, not because I was any funnier, not because I delivered with greater conviction and clarity. I like to think that I did. But when you muted us, you could see that my body language was more expansive. You could see that I was more dynamic in what I was doing. I was moving around the virtual stage. I was bringing props to the camera. And that automatically looked better than just sitting to present. This is all about the stakes of what you're speaking about. If your speech is a high stakes scenario, for example, for me, that was competitive speaking, but this could be a sales pitch. You could be trying to secure a really key client. You could be trying to get funding for your startup. You could be trying to do a big educational webinar to your company that's going to completely change how you approach things as an organization. If your speech has high stakes attached to it, you should not be sitting down. That is when you should get off your butt and stand to present.
When you stand, it automatically gives you that improved presence and that increased dynamism in your body language and gestures that brings more energy into your speaking. Quite often what I'll do if I'm doing a late night talk or workshop is I'll stand up for that. Normally, I'm kind of flagging by that point. I'm a morning person rather than an evening person. And I know if I sit down in that office chair to present, then I'm going to be a little sluggish and a little off the pace. Whereas standing up gives me that extra injection of energy. Even if I'm doing a presentation at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, I can still present with the same energy, enthusiasm that I do at 9, 10, or 11 in the morning. I remember attending some training for leadership. One of the things that I have to do in Toastmasters for being part of the leadership in the organization. And the presenter had clearly heard through the Toastmasters grapevine about standing up being better. For those of you who don't know, Toastmasters, largest public speaking organization in the world. So we're up with the trends in speaking. And this guy had clearly heard of the standing is better maxim. So he stood up to do his presentation. Then he had to show us a video. So he came down and he fiddled and copy and paste the link and post it and then share the screen. And then he stood back to present and talk about the video. And as he's talking and pointing things out, we're all going, we can't hear the video, can't hear the video. Oh, sorry. So he comes down and he fiddles with the keyboard again. Right, let's stop sharing screen and check the audio settings and then share screen again. Okay, can everyone hear it now? Oh, excellent. Okay, so these are the things I wanted to point out earlier. And then he had to come off the video and back into the slides. And then he had something else that he wanted to share into the chat box. And then he had something else that he wanted to share onto the screen. And so there was this back and forth of when he was standing up and he was at the keyboard, standing up at the keyboard. And I was thinking, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I appreciate that you're trying to make this a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more engaging. But actually, because you're faffing back and forth so often with the tech, you're actually making it less dynamic and less engaging. Because his presentation was quite technical, I would have recommended not being standing and doing all the back and forth, but rather
being seated at the equipment. Everything there is underneath your hands. You've got the keyboard there for doing all of your screen swapping and typing things in the chat. The mouse is to hand. If you have any audio stuff going on, sometimes what I do if I've got an audio problem is the easiest and quickest solution is sometimes just take out the equipment. Sometimes you don't know why it's not working. You've maybe just accidentally pressed a button or you've changed the audio settings. Often the easiest reset, just take things out, give it a plug back in, see if it starts working any better after that. All of that is so much easier when you're actually sat at the desktop. That way you aren't doing this constant back and forth. I want to present, but I want to do the technical stuff. No. If it's too technical, just keep everything within arm's reach. You can still put your effort into making things dynamic and engaging, the way that you're using your voice, your gestures, how much you're involving the audience and interacting with them. All of that is still possible when you're sitting down. You've just got to put in that little bit more effort. And if you're not worrying about the technical stuff so much, you're going to be less flustered. You're going to be less all over the place. And you're automatically going to come across more dynamic and engaging anyway, because you're not faffing around with all of the kit. Our Facebook group, Rise and Inspire Speakers, provides you with a safe, supportive community to develop the skills to get your message out into the world. We host a virtual summit, Inspire Week, within the group every month, where you can sign up for a 30-minute slot to speak live in the group. This is a free opportunity you can sign up for month after month to practice your skills, try new things, and refine aspects of your story and message. There is a ton of educational content that gets pumped into this group. You can access ongoing educational resources that help you gain more confidence on camera, create more compelling speech content, and develop a deeper connection with your ideal audiences. Speaking of connection, the members of our community are fantastic. They are like-minded people who, just like you, want to make a difference in the world and will cheer you on and encourage you every step of the way. If you want to master your virtual speaking skills, then this is the place to be. Something that I don't talk about too often, but what you might know about me is that I have a master's degree in psychology. And so I love a good experiment. I love getting two different groups and trying different things out on them and seeing what effects that has. I know that sounds a little bit psychopathic, but it's in the interest of good science, I promise. And this is something that I like to do with speaking. I like to try out different things, run field experiments, and see what works and what doesn't work. And every month, I actually have the opportunity to do a little experiment. Some of you who are watching this probably first came across me in the monthly virtual speaking masterclass that I run. Every single month, 25th of the month, except December, Santa gets that day, but all the other months, I run a 90-minute session. The content is pretty much the same each time, so I get to experiment with the way I present the content, the way I deliver it, how I interact with the audience. And so I've done a little bit of an experiment
to try and settle the standing versus sitting debate. And you'll see from the footage here that sometimes when I've done the virtual speaking masterclass, I've gone for the standing option. And sometimes I've gone for the sitting option. And in fact, I would say that I've gone for sitting most of the time. About 80-90% of the time, I'll sit to do the virtual speaking masterclass. And there's really one important reason why I've decided to do this.
There's a key difference that I've noticed in the virtual speaking masterclasses when I stand and when I sit. And this actually comes up as a question sometimes when we have the Q&A at the end, is how do you get people to interact when you're presenting online? And how do you get them to turn their cameras on? There's a couple of things that I do throughout the masterclass that I keep pretty consistent in terms of how I interact and how I encourage people to turn their cameras on. And if we were to use this as an indicator of how comfortable people feel and how much they're interacting with you, one thing I notice is that when I stand to present the virtual speaking masterclass, less cameras are turned on. I would say that the interaction is about the same in the chat box, but when it comes to the end with the question and answer, and what I encourage people to do at this point in the session is I encourage them again to turn their cameras on if they haven't already, and to unmute and actually ask the question verbally, and we can have a little bit of a dialogue through the session rather than having people speak during the session. It can be a little bit disruptive when you've got as many people on the session that we normally have. But at this point, they can actually start to have more of that conversation. And I noticed that people are more reserved and it takes longer to coax the question out of them when I've been standing to present rather than when I'm sitting to present. When I'm sitting, it seems that more cameras come on. The interaction in the chat box is quite the same. That's quite a informal and, shall we say, less personal way of interacting. And at the end, people seem to turn on their cameras a little bit faster and they seem to unmute and ask their question a little bit faster. It's a limited data set, and I'm not saying that's a perfect indicator of how comfortable people feel, but it seems they become a little bit more comfortable when I'm sitting down with them. Most of them, remember, are sitting down at their desktops to tune in and to listen. And it seems to create a little bit more of that fireside chat feel where I'm not the speaker who is speaking to them. I'm just someone who is sitting down and having a conversation with them. So this interactive aspect of thinking about your speaking plays a lot into this standing versus sitting debate. If you're wanting something that's very interactive, where you're wanting people to be unmuting, to be speaking and to sharing, it seems that it's a much better approach to sit down with them and they feel more comfortable opening up. If you don't have so much of that vocal interaction, it seems to me that chat box interaction doesn't get affected whether you stand up or sit down. So if that's all you're doing, if you're running a session that has hundreds of people, you can't have them unmuting and speaking out. So it's not going to affect your interaction to be standing at that point, and you're going to get the benefits of being more dynamic in your presentation. So that's the third factor to think of when it comes to sitting versus standing.
These are the three factors that you want to consider when you decide whether to stand or sit. You want to lean towards standing if it's a higher stakes scenario, it's less technical presentation, and you're going to be less interactive with the audience. That's why most of the time when I do a YouTube video, I choose to stand, because there isn't very much interaction going back and forth between us. There isn't very much technical stuff that I need to fiddle with. I just need to turn the camera on and off. And it also gives me that extra energy and dynamism so that you are going to stay and watch this YouTube video rather than going and watching that cat video that's sitting waiting in the sidebar for you.
Sitting is probably the better option if you're in a lower stakes scenario. Things aren't going to catastrophically blow up if the presentation doesn't go absolutely perfectly. If you want to have more technical aspects in your speaking and you want to have everything easy to hand and under your fingers. And if you want more interaction in your session, as in people being more verbal and sharing things as opposed to just putting stuff in text, then this is when I would be leaning towards sitting down. But ultimately, it's not a one is better than the other. There are always exceptions that prove the rule. Sometimes I do want to stand up for something I would normally sit down for. As I said, not every virtual speaking masterclass I sit down for. There's sometimes where I feel bringing my energy up through standing is going to create a better outcome than sitting and feeling a little tired and not being on my game. Equally, there's times where I do a YouTube video where I sit down because I want to create a little bit more of an informal style of video. That's kind of what we've done today with all of the different clips between standing up and sitting down. It's something a little bit more different. It's a little bit more informal. It's a little bit more relaxed. And I hope that's a feeling and impression that you've got through this video. Something else that I've done that's got nothing to do with the standing versus sitting is I'm not exactly in the most professional of wear today, am I? So these are all the factors that you think about when you're speaking. It's not that one thing is automatically better than the other. It's all about context. There are people who absolutely love the fact that I'm wearing this jumper, but there's definitely some gigs I would never turn up to wearing something like this. One isn't better than the other. It's all about the context. And that's the one thing that I want you to take away from today. Don't feel that you have to be standing and giving yourself leg ache for every single speech that you do, but equally, don't get stuck in the mud and sit down for every presentation you do either.